Well, good morning. And like you heard, we are jumping into the first week of our new series called Together, Forging Family in Uncertain Times. As you're sitting there this morning, when I say the word family, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Okay, I want you to think about it. I want you to maybe write it down. You can look and turn to your actual family in the room with you, or your roommate or your dog. Tell them this. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word family? For me, when I think of the word family, the first thing that pops into my head is the three people that I share a house with, right? My wife, Rose, our son, Griffey, who's 4, and our 2-year-old daughter, Aria. And then the very next thing that kind of comes into my mind is just this overwhelming rush of memories from the family that I grew up with, right? 18 years, we lived in the same house in Paulsboro, Washington. I remember so many memories so strongly. See, our families make a mark on us. And I actually believe this, they mark us deeper than any other communal experience we would ever have in life. The highs seem higher than anything else. The lows seem lower than anything else. And I start to think about the memories that I had with my family growing up. Right, I think about funny memories. Like we took a road trip around the state of Washington, and we were going to spend half the time camping, the other half in hotels. And on like the second night we were camping, a huge wind comes up and just like blows the tent all over the campground. So we're running after it. We finally get it back in. We're duct taping the thing together. I remember looking back, and it was a really fun time that felt really funny to us in that moment. Family also, right, has those low moments too. I remember as a young adult getting into just a knockdown, drag-out argument with my older sister, Katie, and having her walk out of the upstairs door of that house that we grew up in and looking as her walking to her car and asking myself the question, are we ever going to actually be okay again? Right? But you have those high memories too, right? I remember my dad coming and looking at me and giving me a huge hug and saying, John, I am so proud of the man that you've become. See, families make a huge impact on us. I actually believe this, that families are healthiest for individuals in them when individuals in those families feel valued. And how you feel valued is that you feel that you are known. And so a lot of you guys you've had this in the back of your heads from the beginning of the time that I said family. You say, John, there's actually a problem there. Because I don't feel valued in my family. I don't feel known by my family. In youth ministry, I'd watch this happen with students all the time. I'd see students share these dark, deep, personal things about themselves with friends, with youth leaders, with teachers, and never tell their parents. Because it just didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe because it didn't feel like their parents actually knew them. They didn't feel known. One of the things that we're realizing more and more in society over the last few decades is that it felt like we built up the nuclear family, right? That immediate nuclear family as just like the end all be all, right? You get married, you have 2.5 kids, a dog and a cat, and life is going to be amazing. And that's all you need. That and maybe a good job, right? And it's going to be great. But we're realizing that maybe the nuclear family can use a little bit of help. David Brooks wrote an article for The Atlantic a while back, and he titled it this, Why the Nuclear Family Was a Mistake. And that's some pretty extreme language to communicate his point. And I don't think that nuclear family is a mistake. I think families are really important. But he has some really interesting critiques of how maybe we've placed it on a pedestal by itself and it shouldn't be there anymore. So in that article, and we'll put this up on the screen, he says this, if you want to summarize the changes in family structure over the past century, the truest thing to say is this. We've made life freer for individuals and more unstable for families. We've made life better for adults, but worse for children. We've moved from big, interconnected, and extended families, which help protect the most vulnerable people in society from the shocks of life, to smaller, detached nuclear families, right, a married couple and their children, which gives the most privileged people in society room to maximize their talents and expand their options. This shift from bigger and interconnected extended families to smaller and detached nuclear families ultimately led to a familial system that liberates the rich and ravages the working class and the poor. Americans are now groping to build new kinds of family and find better ways to live. Find better ways to live. That sticks out to me from that. And I watch, right, in culture, we see this too. We're trying to find better ways to live than maybe just this pedestal that we place our immediate nuclear family on. Right? You look at movies, right? You look at the superhero movies that have come out, and they come up with this idea of like, we're going to come together and be a part of a larger family, this idea that we and many others have called a forged family. See, David Brooks uses this term in his article. He talks about this idea that many people are finding forged families in order to supplement their nuclear family as it is. And so I love this term forged family because I love the word forged. And when I think of the word forged, I have this picture of like an old-time blacksmith making a weapon, right? It's not an assembly line, but he's making the mold, he's pouring the metal, he's hammering out. There is blood and sweat and energy and time that goes into forging it and making it into something that will last. So we're going to talk about this idea of the forged family, because what's really interesting is that we feel like we're at a critical juncture in society when it comes to this very topic. Right? There's nothing that shines a magnifying glass on us like a global pandemic that forces us to stay at home. I think some of you are in a situation where you say, I don't actually live with my nuclear family. I'm on my own. I don't even have roommates. And it's really, really lonely. I think some of you are in a situation where you say, I do have roommates, but I don't have that nuclear family yet, and I've wanted that of my own for years, and the timing just hasn't happened yet. And I just feel like I'm missing something. Might be some of you too that you do have that nuclear family, and you're coming to that realization too that it's not enough on its own. That maybe it's not this pinnacle, this thing, the American dream, but it really is something that's good but could use a little bit of extra help. I just think that as we are looking, there's a desire for forged family in the midst of this growing sense of loneliness. And I want to talk about family, because family and connection are different things, right? Like, because we know we can be connected with anyone in the world instantly. With a push of a button, we can be connected to someone on the other side of the world. What's really interesting is that young people, Gen Z, who've grown up with that technology for all of their adolescent lives, they are more connected than any generation we've ever had before, but they are lonelier than any generation that we've had before. I think what's happened is as life slowed down in this season, as we've gotten rid of these obligations of sports, of entertainment, of going out and going to the club or doing any of those things that you can do to fill your time, to feel connected, we might be realizing we don't feel like we're actually known. And so we're going to talk about this idea of the forged family and what God had in mind for us. Because here's what I know. God's plan from the beginning has always been for us to be known, not just by Him, and He knows us, but by people around us as well, the community He has placed around us as well. And God's not caught off guard by anything. God's not surprised in the moments where your nuclear family wasn't quite enough on its own for you growing up. God's not surprised by the fact that I had moments where I felt my family let me down. God's not surprised by the fact that my kids will have moments where they feel that I have let them down as their father. And see, God knows that on its own it's never going to be enough, and so that's why we believe that He has given us a forged family in the form of the church. That it's actually, this forged family concept has been around for the people of God for centuries. And it's what God has given us to find this forged family so that we can live, that we can thrive, and that we can be known. Romans 8 is a section of the Bible that Paul wrote, and in it, Paul's writing this letter to the church at Rome, and he's talking about this very idea of family. We're going to turn to that now. If you have a Bible, I encourage you to open it and go there. We're also going to put it up on the screen. But Romans 8, verse 15 says this. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when He adopted you as His own children. Okay, put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that phrase, adopted you as His own children. Now we call Him Abba, Father. For His Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are His children, we are His heirs. That's also important. Like, underline that if you have a physical Bible, underline that we are His heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are the heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share His glory, we must also share His suffering. Romans 8 says this. It says that we are all sons and daughters. And if any of you know someone that's fostered and then adopted children, knows anyone that's been adopted, or maybe you've been adopted yourself, you know what a special moment that is. That moment of saying, you're not just here temporarily, but full-time, for better or for worse, no matter what, you are a part of this family. And God says this, that there is a forged family that we are adopted into through Jesus. Here's a really cool thing culturally. I had you write down, underline adopting, and that we are his heirs. Like I had you write all that down and underline it because we know that culturally at the time, inheritance was a huge deal. Right? And there weren't lawyers, there weren't wills, there wasn't all these complex ways of deciding who gets inheritance. There were societal norms and rules that were applied whenever someone died. And we know this, that at the time that Paul's writing about, when you were adopted, it meant this: you didn't get a partial share of the inheritance. You got a full measure of the inheritance. That you weren't just this like, oh, well, this is my adopted brother and he's kind of a... No, like he was fully your brother and he got a full share of the inheritance when your father passed. And God's saying this forged family isn't a half measure. You don't get to kind of like half be in the club. You are all in, and it is fully open and available to you. And that's what we look at when we talk about this idea of the church as the forged family. We know this, we are all family through Jesus. It's for us, it includes all of us, and it's vitally important. And it really is, it's for everyone. Paul wrote another letter to Timothy, and in 1 Timothy 5, he talks about who this forged family is for. So in 1 Timothy 5, you can turn there with me. Again, we're going to throw it up on the screen. It says this: never speak harshly to an older man, but appeal to him respectfully as you would to your own father. Talk to younger men as you would to your own brothers. Treat older women as you would your mother, and treat younger women with all purity as you would your own sisters. I think it's really interesting that Paul uses this familial language. That he uses this strong terms, that he's not saying they're your neighbors, he's not saying they're your co-workers or your co-laborers. He's saying, no, they are family. And so today we're going to talk about this idea that we see in God's word of forged family being the church, and what that means for me and what that means for you and us as a community together. So there's a few things that I believe we see about the forged family. The first one is this: we see that the forged family is real. It's real. It's made up of real people, and it's made up of everyone who has said yes to Jesus. And here's the thing: the church, the forged family, it includes that awesome friend that you go out for drinks with on Friday night, but it also includes the weird dude that you would never hang out with, right? It includes the kids that you feel just like your own kids, that call you aunt and uncle even though you're not related to them. But it also includes the kids that you think drive you nuts and wonder why their parents have them on Sunday mornings. It includes all those things, right? Because we don't get to pick who comes into this forged family. One of the things that breaks my heart and I hate seeing is families that will go from church to church to church, spending 12 to 24 months at each one. And every time they go to a new one, they say this in their heads, or maybe even out loud: this time it'll be different. But it never is. Because we're dealing with real people. Real people are imperfect. Real people are messy. I'm messy. You're messy. And so when we know this, the forged family includes real people. And it has to, because otherwise it's not going to do what it's supposed to do. And so we know that because it's real, because it's made of imperfect people, right? We even say that about Anchor. We say at Anchor, we're a group of imperfect Jesus followers living for the good of Tacoma and the greater South Sound. We're going to be honest about that we're messy, that we're imperfect. But I think that there's a beauty in that. Because there's a reality to that, right? When it's imperfect, when it's messy, we know it's not for show, it's not put on. There's a reality to that. And that reality means this, and it's the second thing that we know about the forged family. And that the forged family is actually a blessing to you. It's a blessing to you. Man, like this is for you. I remember I grew up in church, and I remember being 11, 12, 13 and hearing my mom talk with me and saying this, like, John, you have some good friends at school, but man, I just keep praying every single night that you would find amazing community and amazing friends at our church. She's like, I don't feel like you have that yet, and I think you need that in order to get where you want to go in life. I think you need that in order to develop into the man of God that you want to be and I want you to be. When I was 13, a new family moved to our church. They were in the military, and they were moving around all the time for the military, but they moved to Bremerton. They actually stayed there. And there's one of the kids in that family, his name was Matt, and Matt and I formed a friendship. As 13-year-olds, it was formed around PlayStation, orange soda, and watching sports, right? But as years went on, we started to do the things that you do when you grow up at church together, right? You show up on Sunday morning and sit in the back of the sanctuary, not with your family because that's not cool, but you sit by each other because your parents are like, you got to be there, but like, okay, you can sit away from us. We'd show up on Wednesday nights and help out with the kids ministry because we were just looking for something to do, and we got to play basketball in the gym after everything was done. We'd show up early on Sunday mornings and take the donuts from adult Sunday school and hide while we ate them. We would do all these things, and we forged this friendship that became something deeper than friendship. It felt like family. We're best men in each other's weddings. My kids know this guy is Uncle Matt. We're not related at all, but we feel like family. Because you see this, my parents knew this. They knew that as a nuclear family, we just needed some help from other people. Right? I remember this, like Matt and I would grow up and we'd spend half the time at each other's houses. Like half the time I'd be at his house, his parents would get tired of us, then we'd go to my house, we'd bounce back and forth. And we had amazing families and amazing households growing up. We didn't grow up in what anyone would describe as a broken family. It felt very like suburban American dream. We just knew this, like our families needed that extra help. We were meant for something beyond just that immediate family. We were meant to be a part of this larger forged family. And because of that, like I look at my life and I'm where I'm at today because of the forged family and the church that I grew up with. Because my parents did an amazing job of raising me, and they also did a really great job of asking for help. That there are people in the church who called out things in me that I didn't know I could do. There are people in the church who called out things about me as a leader, me as a person, me as a man of God that I never thought was possible. And they said, no, John, I see this in you. And it changed my life. I always joke that with churches, there's, those older ladies that'll sit in the back of the pews and kind of smack you on the back of the head when you're not paying attention. I actually had that. Her name was Debbie Morangi, and she would call me out. She would say, John, you're not supposed to be doing that. Pay attention. And I needed that, right? That's what family does. Family does this. It says, no, like stay in line. And there are people that did that literally for me in those old pews at a church in Bremerton, and people that did that metaphorically in my life as well. And they kept me on track. I said, John, I love you and I love your family way too much to let you do those things. And that's not who you are, so I need you to do this. I look back and man, the Forge family has been such a blessing to me in my life. But the coolest thing that I found about the Forge family is that it's actually a blessing to others. It's a blessing to others, and we get to be a part of it. Going back to 1 Timothy 5, some of you probably have in your Bibles a heading above the passage of chapter 5. And Paul did not write that heading, but people who study the scriptures and translate them did write that to say, here's what this passage is about. And the beginning of it says this, it says, elders, widows, and slaves. I think it's really interesting it does it because you want to know who the most vulnerable people in society were. It's those, right? It's elders. It's people who have lived a long, amazing life, but aren't in a spot where they can work and financially take care of themselves anymore. It's people who have lost their husbands, which in that time, in that culture meant you had no way of making money. And it's slaves, people who were treated just terribly. And Paul, as he's writing this letter, he's saying, this is who the Forge family is for. It is for the least of these. It is for the people on the margins. That is who this is for. And from the beginning of time, the people of God have been called to speak up for those who don't have a voice, to speak up for those people on the margins. I look at what Brooks wrote in his article where he says you can see just income getting more and more stratified, where it seems like fewer and fewer people have more and more money and more people have less money. And this Forge family is the solution to it. And it's been the solution from the beginning of time. God gave us his church. Look at the Old Testament. See the prophets that are saying you are not treating people well and you must turn from that because God hates that. You see that in the New Testament where Paul says the people on the edges of society, that's who is family. Not neighbors, not coworkers. That's family. Because something special happens when we show up and do this. Something special happens when we get together, when we form these imperfect families together and we forge new family to add on to our nuclear families. Something happens when we get rid of those labels, something that Paul's really passionate about. If you read Galatians, if you read Colossians, he's saying these labels that have been used to stratify our society, these labels that have been used to separate people, to say that someone is less than someone else, so those labels are gone when you become family in Jesus. That in Jesus, we are all one. We are all the same. And these labels that have pushed people down, they're no more. That's what it means. The Forge family is a blessing to others. And can I tell you this? There is nothing as cool as getting to be a part of blessing other people. I was a youth pastor for about 8 years before I came to Anchor, and When you do youth ministry in the church, you get to have some amazing experiences. You have some really hard experiences. You have some amazing experiences as well. And it's so cool to see what God does with that. Before we moved down here, we had to talk to the students in my last youth group that God was calling us to this spot at Anchor, and we were moving away down to Tacoma. I remember talking to some of those students, and it's really cool to be able to have those reflection conversations of what have the last 2 years been like for you? Here's what it's been like for me. And I remember being stunned because I had 2 students say this: "You've been the best male role model that I've had in my life." And I remember being shocked because I'm like, I didn't do anything. I don't think I've actually ever been to your house. Like, I've never been in this spot where I've been your dad. And I remember talking and pressing one about them, and they said this. They said, "You showed up every week." You see, their dad, and that was a part of their nuclear family, walked out, didn't come back. I'd love to be like, I was amazing, I was awesome, I was perfect. It wasn't that. I showed up. I was faithful to what God had asked me to do. And guys, God can do incredible things when we are just faithful to show up. When we show up, God can take that and turn it tenfold in ways that we never imagined we would ever see. I think that in this season, there's some of us that need to have that reminder that God just asks us to show up. I think it's easy to look at this season of COVID-19 and uncertainty and say, man, I don't know what to do. It seems like all the things I would normally do, I can't do. So here's this. We're going to give you a few things that you can do to show up and be the Forge family in this season. I think one of them is this. Look at your anchor group. Look at your anchor group. Pick 3 to 5 names. Okay, maybe it's 5 because you're like, I can call 5 people. Maybe it's 3 because you just feel like you can call 3 people. And call them. Take 1 week and call each of those people and just say, hey, I just want to check in on you, see how you're doing in the season. Can I pray for you? And we've been making some of those calls as an anchor team to all of our people. We're trying to call everyone that we have a phone number for. And it's amazing to me how grateful people are just when you ask the question, is there anything we can be praying about for you? And I just do that with some of the people in your anchor group. If you're not in an anchor group, man, you can sign up, go to our website. There a button that says Find Community. You can go there. You can jump into an anchor group. We're still doing those. We're meeting digitally. I just think, look for those people. Maybe it's not people in your anchor group. Maybe it's people that you served with on a Sunday morning. Maybe it's the person that you always talk to in the lobby on Sunday morning and you haven't talked to in a month because we haven't done in-person gatherings. Call, reach out, say, hey, how are you doing? Maybe for you, it's doing what I call planned spontaneity, right? I am not a spontaneous person. You can ask my wife, you can ask Brian, you can ask the people I work with. Right? If someone brings a new idea, my first thought isn't like, yes, let's do it. My first thought is like, but there's like 15 steps we got to make sure of. And so what I do is this, I do planned spontaneity. I think about what's a small thing that could make someone's day. And I plan it all out, and I do it at a random time for them, and that way it seems spontaneous and more fun and more cool. But I thought that out, right? Like whether it's, hey, I know this person loves eating at this restaurant, so I'm going to order a gift card and drop it off at their doorstep. Maybe it's this, think about what neighbors, what friends of yours would appreciate just a kind word in a card. Who would appreciate flowers that you pick on your walk that you take around your neighborhoods now? Who would appreciate just like a nice card and a roll of toilet paper on their doorstep, right? And so I think there's a lot of us in this season that need to start taking those regular small steps of faithfulness to reach out to people. And God's going to multiply that in some amazing, cool ways. But I also think there's another group of us that are watching this, which is this. You've had a hard time reaching out. Maybe you've had a hard time reaching out in this season because you've heard everything I said, but you're like, I've just had some church hurts, and the church has never felt like a Forge family. It's never felt like a family at all. Maybe you're having a hard time reaching out in this season because you just feel overwhelmed. Maybe you're having a hard time in this season because for some reason it's really hard for you to lean in. It's hard for you to accept help. I know that was me. When this all happened, it was a really rough first couple weeks for Rose and I. My wife Rose has struggled with anxiety for most of her life, and so a global pandemic with uncertainty about when will we ever get back to real life just hit her really hard. I remember nights where she would come and say, the kids are safe, they ate today, and that's all I can do. And she was just at her limits. And for me, I put a lot of myself into my work and my ability to do my job well. And my job changed like 3 times in 2 weeks because that's just what it looked like to be a church staff member in this season. And so that kind of like, I felt like my foundation was gone. And whether like, that's probably not the best foundation for me to have, but it was. I felt like it was gone. I felt like I was spinning. I felt like I was shaking. And I remember this, we have these neighbors that live 2 houses down for us, and they've just been incredible. They've dropped off eggs. They've dropped off Easter eggs for our kids. They've dropped off food. They've mowed our lawn twice. Like, I've never mowed the lawn in that house that we are in, and because they've always done it. And I remember thinking, like, I'm a pastor and they're doing a better job of following Jesus than I am, and having a really, really hard time with that. I realized eventually, like, I need to get over myself. Like, it's actually not about me, but they're getting to be a part of blessing me and my family. And they're doing it not because I'm weak or I'm not enough, but because God has said, this is what you do for family. Like, you show up. That's what you do, because that's what it means to be family. This is actually not about you. It's about everyone all together. I also know this, that some of you guys are watching this and you don't feel like you've ever been a part of this family, and you've never said yes to Jesus. And I have really good news for you. God has an invitation for every single one of us, including you, to say yes to Jesus and be a part of this Forge family. What that means is this, is you say, and you're just simply acknowledging, I can't do this on my own. I'm acknowledging that I'm imperfect, that I'm messy, that I'm broken, like I am, like you are, like everyone is, and saying, I can't do this on my own. And acknowledging that God sent his own son, Jesus, who is God himself, and came to earth when he didn't have to live a life and to take a punishment that he never had to. Right? We recognize that on Good Friday. He died on that cross. And as we celebrated on Easter, right, he rose again from the dead. And because of that, he made a way for us to have a relationship with God once again and to be a part of this Forge family. God is giving you that invitation. If you've never said yes, maybe today's your day. Maybe this is the morning where you're going to say, yes, Jesus, I believe that, and I need you. And I need and want to be a part of this Forged family. We're going to close our gathering the way that we close all of our gatherings, by having communion. And communion is this, it's a family meal. It's the most holy, most sacred, most special family meal you'll ever have, but it's a family meal. And it's a family meal for everyone who has said yes to Jesus. Even if you said yes to Jesus for the first time like a minute ago, it's for you. And so historically, it's been recognized and commemorated with bread and wine as we talk about Christ's body broken for us and his blood shed for us. But in this season, it can be anything you eat and anything you drink. And so we're going to have some time where you can grab those and get ready for that time. And we just say that, again, it's an amazing opportunity for those of us to recognize that we are a Forge family. That we are together, and that together we are commemorating the very thing that made it possible, which is Christ's body broken for us and his blood shed for us.